right, guys. We're getting very close to the end of The Witches. Keeping in mind that yesterday he was up the pant leg of one of the cooks in the kitchen, and the man starts screaming, "Help, help, help! It's in my knickers," which are underwear. "It's running around in my flaming knickers. Get it out! Someone help me, please! Get it out! Take off your trousers, you silly slob! Pull down your pants and we'll soon catch him." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where two trousers meet. And the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed upward and found the top of the trouser leg. I went down it like a greased lightning and came out the bottom of it, and once again I was on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers! It's in my trousers! Get it out! Get it out! Will someone please get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding around him and laughing their heads off, but nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sack of potatoes. Whoa. I burrowed down among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. A cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because now they were shouting, "It's not in there. There's no mouse in there, you silly twerp." There was. I swear there was. You've never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like. The fact that a little tiny creature like me had caused such commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again, the kitchen was all abustle with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with a complaint about tough meat coming in again. "Hey, boys," he shouted. "I asked the old hag if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really, really tasty." I had to get out of that kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only way to do this. I must take a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly, because remember, it had been cut. I curled it around so to have a look at it. About 2 inches of my tail were missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across the kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light. I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again, in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shinnied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I said. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done. They are at this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly she withdrew her hand and she said, "Oh my goodness, you're bleeding. My darling, what has happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered back. "It hurts like a bilio. Let me look at it." She bent with her head and examined my tail. "You poor little thing. I'm going to bandage it up with my kerchief. That will stop the bleeding." She fished a small lace-edged handkerchief out of her bag, which is kind of like a tissue but made out of cloth. And this somehow she managed to wrap around the end of my tail. "You will be all right now," she said. "Just don't forget about it. Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup?" "Every drop," I said. "Do you think you could put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she said, "my darling. My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out for as long as you are careful not to be seen. Bruno is there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's what's keeping him busy for a while." Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off her lap and transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said. This is grandmother's fixing his tail. I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their 2 long tables in the center of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lifted up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke out everywhere. All around us, the summer holiday guests in this rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of the old people were had walking sticks, but there was also plenty of families with husband and wife and several children. They were all well-to-do, and you had to be if you wanted to stay in a hotel like this. Hotel Magnificent. That's her, Grandmama. That's the Grand High Witch. I know. She's the tiny one in black, sitting at the head of the nearest table. She could kill you, I whispered. She could kill anyone in this room with their white-hot sparks. Look out. The waiter's coming. I popped right down out of sight, and I heard William saying, "Your roast lamb, madame. And which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots?" "Carrots, please," my grandmother said, "but no potatoes." I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering, "It's all right. He's gone." I popped my head up again. "Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this." "No," she said. "I don't suppose that they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips." "You're doing beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 200? It just seemed like 200, I said. I was wrong, too. I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England. How many are there?" 84, she said. "There were 85, I said, but one of them got fried." At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight to our table. "Look out, Grandmama. Here comes Bruno's father." Mr. Jenkins and his son. Mr. Jenkins came striding out to our table with a very purposeful look on his face. "Where's that grandson of yours?" he said. He spoke rudely and looked very, very angry. My grandmother put on her frostiest look, but didn't answer him. My guess is that he and my son Bruno are up to some devilement. Bruno hasn't turned up for a supper, and it takes a lot to make a boy miss his food. I must admit he has a very healthy appetite, my grandmother said. My feeling is that you're in on this as well. I don't know who the devil you are, and I don't much care, but you played a nasty trick on me and my wife this afternoon. You put a dirty little mouse on the table. That makes me think all 3 of you are up to something. So if you know where Bruno is hiding, please kindly tell me at once." "There was no trick that I played on you," my grandmother said. "That mouse I tried to give you was your own little Bruno. I was trying to be kind to you. I was trying to restore him to his bosom of his family, and you refused to take him." "What the blazes do you mean, madam? My son isn't a mouse." A black mustache was jumping up and down on his face, crazy as he spoke. "Come on, madam. Where is he? Out with it." The family at the nearest table to us had all stopped eating, and they were staring at Mr. Jenkins. My grandmother sat there puffing away calmly at her black cigar. "I can well understand your anger, Mr. Jenkins. Any other English father would be just as cross as you are. But over in Norway, where I come from, we are quite used to these sorts of happenings. We have learned to accept them as part of everyday life." "You must be mad, woman. Where is Bruno? If you don't tell me at once, I shall summon the police." "Bruno is a mouse," my grandmother said. "He most certainly is not a mouse." "Oh, yes, I am," Bruno said, and he stuck his head up out of the handbag. Whoops. It's hard to do this. Wait. There we go. Mr. Jenkins leapt about 3 feet into the air. "Hello, Dad," Bruno said. He had a silly sort of mousy grin on his face. Mr. Jenkins' white mouth dropped open so wide I could see his gold filling in the back of his mouth. "Don't worry, Dad. It's not as bad as all that. Just so long as the cat doesn't get me." "Bruno!" "No more school," said Bruno, grinning a broad and asinine mouse grin. "No more homework. I shall live in the kitchen cupboard and feast on raisins and honey." "Bruno, how did this happen?" The poor Man had no wind left in his sails. Witches, my grandmother said. The witches did it. I can't have a mouse for a son. Well, you've got one. Mrs. Jenkins will go crazy. She can't stand for these things. She will just have to get used to them. I hope she doesn't keep a cat in the house. We do. Topsy is my wife's favorite creature. Then you have to get rid of Topsy. Your son is more important than your cat. Oh my goodness, he certainly is, Bruno shouted from the inside. You tell Mom she's got to get rid of Topsy before I come home. By now, half the dining room was watching our little group. Knives and forks and spoons had been put down all over the place. Heads were turning to stare at Mr. Jenkins as he stood there, spluttering and shouting. They couldn't see either Bruno or me, and they were wondering what all of the fuss was about. By the way, my grandmother said, would you like to know who did this to them? There was a mischievous little smile on her face, and I could see that she was about to get Mr. Jenkins into trouble. Who? He cried. Who did this? That woman over there, my grandmother said. The small one in a black dress at the head of that long table. She's RSPCC. She's the chairwoman, Mr. Jenkins said. No, she's not, said my grandmother. She is the Grand High Witch of all of the world. You mean she did it? The skinny little woman over there, said Mr. Jenkins, pointing his long finger. By gad, I will have my lawyers on her for this. I will make her pay through her nose. I wouldn't do anything rash. That woman has magic powers. She might decide to turn you into something sillier than a mouse. A cockroach, perhaps. Then turn me into a cockroach? I'd like to see her try. He swung around and started marching across the dining room towards the Grand High Witch. My grandmother and I watched. Bruno had jumped up onto our table and was also watching his father. Practically everyone in the dining room was watching Mr. Jenkins now. I stayed where I was, peeping out of my grandmother's handbag. I thought it might be wiser to stay put. The triumph. Mr. Jenkins had not gone more than a few paces towards the Grand High Witch's table when a piercing scream rose high above all the noises in the room. And at the same moment, I saw the Grand High Witch go shooting up into the air. Now she was standing on her chair, still screaming. Now she was up on the tabletop, waving her arms. What on earth is happening, Grandmama? Wait, just wait. Keep quiet and watch, my grandmother said. Suddenly, all of the witches, more than 80 of them, were beginning to scream and jump up out of their seats as those spikes were being stuck into their bottoms. Some were standing on chairs, some were up on tables, and all of them were wiggling about and waving their arms in the most extraordinary manner. Then, all at once, they became quiet. Then, they stiffened. Every single witch stood there as stiff and as silent as a corpse. The whole room became deathly still. They're shrinking, Grandmama, I said. They're shrinking just like I did. I know they are, my grandmother said. It's the mouse maker. Look, some of them are growing fur on their faces. Why is it working so quickly, Grandmama? I'll tell you why, my grandmother said, because all of them have had massive overdoses just like you. It's thrown the alarm clock right out of whack. Everyone in the dining room was standing up now to get a better view. People were moving closer. They were beginning to crowd around the two long tables. My grandmother lifted Bruno and me up so that we wouldn't miss any of the fun. In her excitement, she jumped up onto her chair so that we could see over the heads of all of the crowd. In another few seconds, all of the witches had completely disappeared, and the tops of the two long tables were swarming with small, brown mice. All over the dining room, women were screaming, and strong men were turning white in the face and shouting, "It's crazy! This can't happen! Let's get the heck out of here, quick!" Waiters were attacking the mice with chairs and wine bottles and anything else that came into hand. I saw a chef in a tall white hat rushing out from the kitchen, brandishing a frying pan, and another one just behind him was wielding a carving knife. "Mice, mice, mice! We must get rid of the mice!" they shouted. Only the children in the room were really enjoying it. They all seemed to know instinctively that something good was going on right here in front of them, and they were clapping and cheering and laughing like mad. "It is time to go," my grandmother said. "Our work is done." She got down off her chair, picked up her handbag, and slung it over her arm. She hid me in her right hand and Bruno in her left. "The time has come to restore you to the famous bosom of your family. My mom's not very crazy about mice, so I noticed. She'll just have to get used to it, won't she?" It was not difficult to find Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. You could hear Mrs. Jenkins' shrill voice over the room. "Herbert! Herbert! Get me out of here! There's mice everywhere! They've overrun my skirts!" My grandmother advanced upon them. "Here's your little boy," she said. "He needs to go on a diet." "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Mum," said Bruno. Mrs. Jenkins screamed even louder. My grandmother, with me in hand, turned and marched out of the room and into the lobby. Outside, it was lovely, warm evening, and I could hear all the waves of the breaking on the beach just across the road from the hotel. "Is there a taxi here?" she asked the uniformed man. "Certainly, madame." He blew his fingers into his mouth and blew a long shrill. I watched him with envy. For weeks I had been trying to whistle like that, but I hadn't succeeded. Now I never would. The taxi came. The driver was an oldish man with a thick mustache. The mustache hung over his mouth like roots of some plant. "Where to, ma'am?" "Blimey," he said. "What is that?" "It's my grandson." "Drive us to the station, please." "I always liked mice," the taxi driver said. "I used to keep hundreds of them when I was a boy." "Mice is the fastest breeders in the world. Drive us to the station, please." "Yes, ma'am, right away." "Are we going home?" I asked. "Yes." "Hooray! Oh, hooray, hooray, hooray!" I thought you would like that. "But what about our luggage?" "Who cares about our luggage?" The taxi driver drove through the streets of this time of day. It was crowded with holiday makers. "How are you feeling, my darling?" "Fine, quite marvelous. We've accomplished great feats today." "It's been terrific," I said. "Absolutely terrific." The Heart of a Mouse is next.